Welcome to our Bible tour in the British Museum. This tour was developed to respond to the good questions that some of our Muslim friends ask of the Christian faith, primarily the Bible and especially the Old Testament. It's also questions that people in society ask. People inside the church, people outside the church ask these questions about the Bible. How do we know the Bible is reliable when it reports what happened in history? Well, when you go with us on our tour through the British Museum, we're going to walk with you through incredible ancient history, looking at artifacts that were put together by or written by kings and their scribes. We're going to look at obelisks that were put up in marketplaces hundreds, thousands of years ago, in fact. We're going to look at steles that are murals from palace walls and steles that have ancient cuneiform in different languages, writing about the adventures and the supposed victories of the ancient kings. And those kings and the details within those obelisks put up in marketplaces and murals from palace walls and city walls and so on. Those artifacts talk about details. They talk about the names of kings. They talk about some of the prophets that we know. King Hezekiah. There's artifacts that address Ezra and Nehemiah in the time of Esther and Daniel. We'll look at wonderful stories to do with Moses and Abraham almost 4,000 years ago. And when we look at those ancient artifacts, we look at the details on those artifacts and we compare it to the biblical story. And then we begin to look at the details within the biblical story. So many of the Old Testament books, the Book of Kings, the Book of Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, which we already mentioned, and other books, we'll look at the Book of Genesis and Exodus, and we'll do a comparison between the details about peoples, about places, about events, about dates that are in the Old Testament, and then compare it with the murals and the steles and the obelisks that are in this British Museum. And then we put the two together and we get a big view of what happened in history. Now, sometimes those different records of history agree, and sometimes they disagree. But don't think it's the Bible that gets its details wrong. In fact, as you go through the tour with us, we hope to bring you to the conclusion that you'll see it is uniquely the Bible that gets the details right. Even details about shameful stories to do with our prophets and to do with our kings. Whilst the murals written by the kings in this museum, they're really bragging accounts, they're propaganda, they're ancient kings who were using political spin to make them look good and to make them look victorious, even when we know they weren't victorious. So walk with us through this museum, look at those ancient artifacts, compare it with the Bible stories, and look at what God has done through history, how the details of the Bible and the history that He has told us, both directly through, say, His face-to-face conversations with Moses, and also through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit on the many apostles and prophets of old. And let's do a comparison between those their stories and the record you see in the museum, and see the wealth of material that supports the biblical story. And to quote an archaeologist, Nelson Glueck, who says this, that in the archaeological record around the world, there is nothing in the archaeological record that controverts a properly understood biblical statement. That means nothing that's been discovered around the world in the archaeological record undermines the biblical story. And there is actually no other ancient book from history that can make that claim, that the Bible is reliable in its portrayal of history, especially when you compare it to the writings and the records of the ancient kings.